All right, hello, and welcome back to the Chase Must podcast, taping this on a Tuesday night. TrillBroDude is here. TrillBroDude. I love just introducing you that way. TrillBroDude, let's start off this. Are the Sixers good? Do we need to have a Sixers conversation? Are we sure? Joel Embiid is an MVP candidate? Are we sure?
All right, well, first off, thank you, Bill Simmons, for having me back onto the podcast. Is Russillo or House there? I was wondering.
No Russillo, no House. I got Khaleesi the dog behind me. She's passed out, so she might join the show at some point. Who knows?
Are we sure? Are we sure that Joel Embiid is good? I don't know, House. So yes, I think it's fair to question whether the Sixers are good this early into the season, to be honest. I would say they're certainly not performing up to the level of their talent so far. I think that they will figure it out over the course of the season. I think there are new pieces that are trying to fit in the mix, figure it out on the fly. We have 4 new rotation players this year. Only 1 new starter, but a different version of James Harden than we got last year. A different version of Tobias Harris, to be honest, and PJ Tucker, who is not Danny Green. He's probably closer to Matisse Thybulle in terms of his impact on the offensive end. So it's been kind of a weird mix of players and trying to incorporate everyone. And then also we can talk all day about, and we'll get to the coach and all that, but my whole thing is if Joel Embiid plays the way he does in the first 2 games, we're not winning many games. That's kind of what it comes down to, is that when your best player performs the way that he does in the Boston game and in the Milwaukee game, there are very few teams that can overcome your best player just, crapping the bed, as Zach Lowe likes to say. So I think that so far it was a little bit concerning. I wasn't concerned after the Boston and Milwaukee game. I was a little bit like, this sucks. I would have liked to win one of these games, but they're 2 really good teams. And it was opening night for both of them. As it literally was Milwaukee's first game, Boston's first game. I think that, I knew it was going to take some time to figure out stuff. The Spurs game is where I really started to get concerned, where I'm like, okay, why are we just getting out hustled by a team that should want to get Victor Wembanyama next year? Why is this happening? So overall, the panic meter after the Spurs game was at a 4 for me. I was at a 1 or a 2 after the first 2 games. Then it was at a 4. And now the win against Indiana, I'm probably still at around a 3 or a 4. But there are definitely some issues and flaws with this team that I don't know if they're going to be able to work it out.
What's been the best 5-man lineup, and what do you actually think is the best 5-man lineup they can play? And why does it include Gorgie Jang? George Niang.
George Niang, Gorgie. It's a little confusing. No, I understand it. It is. They have similar names. They rhyme even.
Yes.
But so far, I mean, I by the numbers, you would be surprised to learn that I would be willing to bet that the lineup without Joel Embiid has been our best lineup. There was one game, specifically the Milwaukee game, where when Joel was out, they went on a 12-0 run in the fourth quarter to come all the way back. James Harden leading that unit. I believe Montrezl Harrell was playing at center. You had Daniel House, DeAnthony Melton, Tobias Harris, or PJ Tucker, one of the 2. I'm sorry. Montrez, it was a small ball 5 lineup. So it's a very small sample size, but that was so far the best lineup in terms of net rating, in terms of actually outscoring the opponents. I would hope that over the course of the season that the best lineup is the starters, because if you look at the Joel Embiid era, if you look at James Harden's history, their starting units usually have a +10 to +20 net rating. When Harden got here last year, from the time, playoffs, it was a little bit different, but in the regular season, the starting lineup, even when it had Matisse Thybulle, whether it was Danny Green or Matisse Thybulle in that 5th starter spot, the Sixers had the highest net rating of any starting lineup in the NBA post-Harden trade. Offensively, they were unstoppable. They had a 123 offensive rating. It was crazy. Now, just to put it in context, it's more a 116. They're at a +8. They were at a +17 or 18 last year. So I would hope it's the starting lineup. I think one of the things about that I hope they figure out over the course of this season is kind of what lineups work best with Joel, what lineups work best with Harden. Because last year, the issue was when you put Harden on the bench, the Sixers really struggled on offense. And when you put Embiid on the bench, the Sixers really struggled on defense. It seems like, so far, at least to start the year, those Harden lineups have kind of at least figured out how to outscore the opponent. And especially those small ball lineups with PJ Tucker, where you can space the floor for Harden, you can let him cook. I think that those could be really successful. And I think that the Embiid lineups are basically just going to come down to how good is Tyrese Maxey as the lead perimeter creator, and how many 3-and-D guys can we put around him? Can Tobias Harris play with that unit and be a viable 3-and-D guy? Can Daniel House start actually making threes? Can DeAnthony Melton start making threes? So there is a ton of variety and a ton of options that they can do. They have multiple backup center options. They have multiple wing options. I'm just not really sure. I'm hoping that the starting lineup is the one that ends up having the best net rating, and I think over time it will.
Interesting. How much of this is on Doc? Like, it's the first place you go when there's any kind of struggling with any kind of team. It's you go to the coach. But in terms of what you actually seen this year, TBD, how much of it falls on Doc Rivers?
So the first 2 games, I'm not placing pretty much any blame on Doc.
Okay.
Look, like, were there things he could have done better? Yes, absolutely. Every coach is going to have issues throughout the course of an 82-game regular season. Once again, Joel Embiid was terrible in both of those games. Literally the worst games I've ever seen him play as a Sixer. Like, that 1-point game in Toronto, like, you might look at the box score and be like, he scored 25 points. How could he have been that bad against Boston? I'm telling you, it was worse than the 1-point game that he had against the Toronto Raptors a few years ago. Like, he was a disaster on defense. Could not defend anyone in space, was dropping way too deep into drop coverage so guys could walk directly into pull-up mid-range shots, pull-up threes. No one could fight over screens, so it was just it was basically just whatever the Celtics wanted at any time. Offensively, anytime he touched the ball and faced a double team, he could not read anything. He was not able to get the ball out. He was not able. He turned the ball over a ton, which led to a ton of points on the other end for Boston. He was a disaster, and he was a disaster in the third quarter of the Bucks game too. So if Embiid is going to play as poorly as he did, I can't blame the coach at all. The Spurs game is where I was like, the coach has to have some. Take some responsibility.
Hey, the Spurs are actually good. People forget. I've been saying for months, the Spurs actually good. Devin Vassell, just a lot of fun. We're already at that point in the NBA season where people are like, here's some Devin Vassell. Like he's fun. Yeah, they're playing loose. They're playing free. I love that. Like
they're gonna win 25. Like, let's be honest. Like this is what happens. Like you know, young teams come out and they feel like they're being underestimated. And once again, they don't want to tank. The players on those teams want to prove themselves, and they want to prove that they belong in the NBA. So they have no invested interest in tanking. It's the front offices and the coaches and everyone.
When you start moving pieces where it's like, oh, they're doing a little bit too well. All right, Doug McDermott and
Josh Richardson.
Yeah, you're getting traded. Like you're out the door. So we have to play more young. That's the thing with the Jazz where people are like blown away by the Jazz right now. And I said before the year, and I'm like, well, if they keep this roster together, they're not going to have the worst team. Like they're only playing competent rotation players right now. Like, they're not young.
They're pretty deep. They don't have star power, but they have a solid 1 through 9.
They're a pain in the ass. You don't want to play them on a Tuesday night. You're like, this sucks. I hate this. I don't want to play you guys.
It's the same reason why the Raptors, despite like never having a superstar except for 1 year, are always really, really good. Because their rotation 1 through 8 is always solid to good NBA players. And the power of that is that, you're going to go up against some teams that are top heavy. And if they have guys out or guys banged up or just guys who, like the Sixers the other night against the Spurs, just look like they didn't want to be there, then you're going to have some nights where you upset some teams that people might perceive as better than you. But back to the Doc thing, I think the Spurs game was the one time that I really started to be like, okay, like what is going on here? Clearly there is some sort of disconnect happening between the coach and the players. One of the things that happened in the Boston game, and not as much in the Milwaukee game, but like even in the Milwaukee and the Indiana game, the offensive numbers might not look great for those teams, but they were getting wide open looks and just missing. So the Sixers perimeter defense and that might be a roster construction issue. That might be Joel Embiid is out of shape and we're playing a drop coverage and we're not playing him at the level as much, and things that he was able to do last year when he was in better shape and he was injured this offseason. That might be a number of things. James Harden and Tyrese Maxey at the point of attack is not going to always have great results. But I do think that like the thing that I've been saying about Doc, and by the way, I know you're a Hawks fan. I've been saying get rid of Doc since the Hawks series. I'm just like, I've seen.
I bet you would say since Doc was a Hawk, like just get rid of him.
No, that's what we talked about last time. It was but my thing is like, if you want to win a championship, I don't think Doc Rivers should be your coach. Like, I just don't think that he has the ability to. Now, look, if he gets the 2008 Celtics roster again, then sure, maybe he can win a championship. But he's not lifting your ceiling any higher. He might lift your floor a little bit higher because he's good at motivating guys and getting guys to play up to a higher level and whatever. And that's been his whole thing throughout his career. But if that's happening in the Spurs game, he's clearly not doing that. He's not doing his job. He's not a brilliant X's and O's guy. He's not a great, like, I'm just trying to figure out what he really does is my whole thing. And if his whole thing is... You're
trying to Office Space our guy.
I know. I literally just had Derek Bodner on my podcast the other day, and he was like, it's literally, what would you say you do around that is what I feel like with Doc, where the thing that Doc has always been really good at is getting through to players, making sure guys are in the right spots, getting the most out of their talent. But he's not going to scheme you to a win like Eric Spoelstra or Ty Lue or one of these guys that's like has a system that's proven. Yeah. So because of that, when you're getting into year 3 with Doc and the message might start to fade a little bit and the star players are kind of like, what is this guy talking about? Then that's where you have to seriously consider moving on because... And
you have 2 good in-house options, right? Like you have Sam Cassell, who I'm still surprised has never gotten a head coaching shot yet. Definitely. And then Dave Yeager, who, if you want to talk about like the floor raiser, whatever you have to say about Dave Yeager, he's like the Eastern Conference Mike Malone, where you're just like, I'm not sure. Like the defense is always good. They always figure it out. It looks clunky. You're not sure what they're, like you said, just the D'Antoni, you know what that coach is. You know what you're going to get out of Eric Spoelstra. You know, like for a lot of different teams, what these coaching staffs are going to bring out and what they're going to try and do. But I think Yeager was just one of those Kings fans who was like, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want to have Dave Yeager? Like, I understand you want to have a more fun offense, but like, dude won games. Like Dave Yeager wins games. Like he's a floor raiser.
The problem with a guy like Yeager, who he's the complete opposite of, is it Yorger or Yeager? I can never remember.
I might just have always gone Yeager just because
I think it's Yorger, but
is it Yorger?
It might be. I mean, it's spelled that way, but I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I honestly can't even remember. But
Dave Yeager, come on the pod. Let's figure this out. You and me, Chase Thomas podcast. Let's go.
They definitely have multiple guys that they could bring up. I think Dave's is like the opposite of Doc in that like he's the X's and O's guys that doesn't want to have relationships with his players at all. Like he's literally gone on record being like, we're coworkers. Like I don't want to hang out with De'Aaron Fox off the field. Like he's like, that's not really my thing. Like it's a Saturday night, I'm chilling at home, like whatever. Whereas Doc is more like he gets like, I think Joel Embiid and James Harden like Doc. Like I think that there is a level of respect there for him because he was a player. He made an all-star team. He's won a championship. I think that most players, except for Ben Simmons, like Doc Rivers as a head coach until they don't, is what I'm trying to say here. Is like, I think him and Chris Paul got along great. Then they had a falling out. I think that a lot of guys over the years, Ray Allen, like there are plenty of examples of guys who had great relationships with Doc when they were winning and everything was going great. And the second that there was some adversity, maybe their relationship fell by the wayside. And that is something that, if that is what ends up happening with the Sixers, that's where I think the Sixers could end up making a move where they're moving off Doc. That would have to come from James Harden or Joel Embiid. Like Derek Bodner said that on my podcast the other day. He's like, unless one of those two guys is going to Morey or Morey thinks that his job is in trouble, those are the only two ways that they move on from Doc in the middle of the season. But if it is truly like it was just a bad start, the team couldn't hit a shot, the defense, the pieces didn't fit, but they figure it out over the course of a season, I think that Doc will probably finish the year, and it's kind of, my thing is like, there's kind of only two buttons left to push if you're the Sixers. One is fire Doc Rivers, and one is trade Tobias Harris.
I didn't say trade Maxey.
No, I well, it depends. Who are you getting back? Because I personally am so invested in, Maxey better sadly here, that I think that if you're trading Tyrese Maxey, it has to be for an all NBA level player. And the reason I say that is because that's really your last move. Like, because if you miss on that, and then Maxey goes on to be a multiple time All-Star, and he's still on his rookie contract for this year and next year, and you're moving on from him, and you're not getting back a Jimmy Butler or Kevin Durant or someone that is like a top 15, top 20 player. Like, there were debates whether we should trade him for Donovan Mitchell over the summer. And I was like, look, if Tyrese Maxey has the same career as Donovan Mitchell, then that's a massive one. He hit his 100th percentile. Like, he hit the highest end possible outcome for him. I didn't think that the Mitchell Embiid Harden fit was good enough to really justify trading Maxey for him. I also don't think the Jazz were really interested in getting Tyrese Maxey. I think they wanted picks. But I remember having arguments, and I'm the number one Maxey guy, being like, he'll probably never be as good as Donovan Mitchell, and I'm fine with never trading him for Donovan Mitchell. I would not be fine if we got to the point where it's like, all right, we clearly need something to happen here, and there's a top 20 player who I view as a good fit with those two, with Harden and Embiid, and then they're passing on that. Then I would be like, okay, what are we doing here really? Because like, we have to optimize the last years of Harden. We have to optimize the prime of Joel Embiid, because if all of those things, those last three things, trading Tobias Maxey and firing Doc, don't work, then you just have to admit Joel Embiid and James Harden just aren't good enough to win a championship. So that's kind of where the crossroads is going to be over this next year or two. And we'll see. I don't think they're going to speed up the process unless this year's truly a disaster. But if things really go off the rails, I think they'll be trying to make every move that they possibly can, because I think this is an extremely crucial year for the Sixers.
Yeah, and I also just wonder, just the thing with Maxey, it's not really his fault, but his usage is, I think, last I saw was 22% right now.
Yeah.
And like you said, this was something the Hawks were going through as well, where Cam Reddish or DeAndre Hunter or whoever it was, with Trey's usage, there was just a really difficult path to maximizing any of these high picks around Trey. And I mean, the Mavs figured that out, and they're like, yeah, we're moving on. Like, we're going vets only around Luka Doncic, because like, he's just, the oxygen is just so much when you have that kind of high usage guard that, I mean, I don't know if you've watched any of the Hawks yet this year, but it's a little clunky. Trey's not shooting the ball well. DeAndre Hunter is not going to be a star. Cam Reddish is out the door. John Collins obviously not going to get the looks. Onyeka Okongwu is not getting the looks, and you have Capella blocking him. It's hard, I think, for fans to see, like, where I think with Maxey, I just wonder, where is the path to him getting the usage necessary to become, like you said, the 100 percentile is Donovan Mitchell.
Right.
I don't think there's a path on this roster over the next couple of years, and these years are so critical for a young player to either become that guy, or they're 25 and it's over and they're just a role player from here on out. So you're kind of, it's very, very difficult for teams to tote that line with players like Maxey, because, I mean, you want to give him every opportunity to be a star, but it's also like, okay, you want to have the conversation with James Harden or Joel Embiid saying that your usage is going down, and we really have to make sure that Maxey's a third star? No, it's not happening. So I don't know. I just struggle trying to figure out what a team like the Sixers should do with Maxey, because you have that upside, but it's also like, I don't see the path to him getting to that 100 percentile, because he's blocked a little bit.
So 3 things with this. The first thing is that the difference between Cam Reddish and all those guys that you named, while, John Collins may be a little bit different, he's a really good off-ball player. Maxey's one of the best off-ball players in the NBA, and it's not really discussed that much. Like the creative ways, and this might actually go back to Doc Rivers, and maybe a little bit goes back to James Harden and Joel Embiid as well, because they need to make it a priority to make sure that he's involved. Because anytime you have any sort of heliocentric star, whether it's the Trae Youngs or the James Hardens, there's going to be a little bit of, okay, so we just stand around and wait for this guy to cook and, hope to hit an open three or whatever. But last year, when they first got Maxey, they were using him really creatively off the ball. And so far, they have not used him creatively off the ball at all. Even honestly, one of the ways that there were two different ways that they did it last year. One, they would set Maxey up in the corner. And anytime that Harden's defender started to cheat off of Maxey, he would hit Maxey with a pass, and Maxey is just like a speeding bullet. So he got downhill immediately and was able to either generate an advantage for himself, get to the hoop, or generate an advantage for whoever was in the paint, Joel Embiid or Paul Reed or whoever, and just dump it off to them. And then the other thing that they would do is they would let him set up the offense sometimes. So he was kind of used as like a little bit of a distraction to get other guys into their spots. And they would have him move a ton off the ball when he didn't have the ball. So they would run him off screens. They would do little, Iverson cuts that they were doing for him and Seth Curry last year to get them involved when they did not have the ball. And that was a way to keep them kind of active. But this year it's been a lot of let's put Maxey in the corner. And I honestly, like, part of it is James Harden, being as kind of back to where he was before. Maybe not Houston James Harden, but kind of like a version of the Brooklyn Nets Harden we saw at first. And I think that, like, you can't use Tyrese Maxey like he's Danny Green. Like, you just can't let him sit in a corner the whole game. So the real next steps in his development will be when James Harden is on the bench, because the last few games we've just been running those Harden, those Embiid Maxey lineups. And honestly, Maxey has not taken advantage of them. Like Maxey himself has to be called on to be aggressive. It didn't really happen until the end of the Boston game. It didn't happen until the end of the Pacers game last night, and he couldn't buy a bucket. So ultimately, this kind of comes down to how aggressive Tyrese Maxey wants to be when he has the ball, and how much better will he get as a passer, because as good as he is at scoring, as good as he is at moving off the ball, as good as he is at shooting, as good as he is at everything that he's good at, he's still not advanced as a passer at all. So the development thing kind of comes down to the coaching staff, Harden, and Maxey himself really kind of learning more advanced reads, because when he has the ball, like, sure, we can take the ball out of James Harden's hands, but at the same time, like, James Harden is the best decision maker on the team. I joked last night on Twitter. I said, if it weren't for Harden, this might be the dumbest team in NBA history. Like, the amount of horrible passes, the amount of stupid fouls, the amount of just boneheaded decisions. Last night, George Niang and Paul Reed were fighting with each other for a rebound, and they were jostling back and forth, not realizing that they were on the same team. Niang drops the ball. Duarte picks it up, hits a mid-ranger. I'm like, these kind of things that happen are why James Harden always has the ball. Joel Embiid is turning the ball over a ton when he touches it. He's been inefficient to start the year. He's kind of bounced back a little bit on offense over the last two games. But until Maxey gets to the point where he is that, like, high-level advantage creator for himself and others, I think that you just need to kind of try to optimize him as much off the ball as possible and have him work off of Harden and Embiid until he gets there, because he's not going to get there. He's not going to get there just force feeding him reps on the ball, because the advancement with passing stuff, like, you got to work on that in the offseason. You got to work on that in practice. You got to be prepared for all that. And then once you are up to a certain level, then I think you deserve more of the primary creator reps that I don't think right now he's ready for. I think he's still at best a secondary creator, attacking defenses when they're on a slant, off the ball when he's able to get and go in transition, but he still kind of has a long way to go as a on-ball primary creator that can lead an offense.
So there you have it. TBD. Tyrese Maxey. He sucks.
No, he's better, sadly. I still have all of my Tyrese Maxey stock, and I will never let it go. I'm telling you, over the offseason, I was digging up stats from the Maxey's second season, and I'm not saying he is these players at all. I think they're very different
Michael
players.
Jordan, Kobe Bryant.
Yes. But I'm not saying that he's these players at all, because they're all very different players in different ways. But if you compared Maxey's age 21 season stats to guys at the same age as him, it was like Damian Lillard, Steph Curry, Jamal Murray. So while he is a very different player, and all of those guys are probably more primary on-ball type creators, I think Maxey has potential to be one of the best second or third options in the NBA. And it's really up to him, the coaching staff, Harden and Embiid, to figure out how we can optimize him the best, how we did at the end of last year, which made the offense at the end of the regular season and in 3 or 4 of those Toronto games just absolutely unstoppable.
What has been one common thread through each Sixers game that you've jotted down? What is one thing that you have found is consistent with every game so far?
You want to go negative or positive?
Let's go negative. You're too the Maxey stuff was too glowing. Like we gotta. People love the negative. People love to harp on the negative.
All my biggest podcast. Like I just had my biggest episode, and it was literally, is Doc Rivers on the hot seat? Like that's
people love that.
Stuff. They love it. They eat it up.
Mm-hmm.
So negatively, so I talked about the transition defense earlier. The transition defense, there's a few different factors here. The main one is that when you have a post-up center, I think the Nuggets and the Sixers are going to realize how hard it is this year with the new take foul rules, where when you are operating your offense out of the post on one end, that those take fouls, you used to be able to just like, okay, well, if Joel Embiid misses a shot and he doesn't get back on defense, at least we can foul the other team, send them to the line, whatever. Like if they're going to get an advantage. Well, now you can't do that because they get the free throw and then they get the ball back. So you're basically giving up more points per possession every single time. And I think that the Nuggets and the Sixers are going to learn in a very hard way that you have to have some sort of alternative. You either have to have Jokic and Embiid completely buying in on getting back, and like Embiid and Tobias Harris was doing it last night too. Harden will do it, I guarantee. Complaining to refs has to wait. It has to wait. You cannot complain to refs, or if you do, the other team is getting a bucket. They just will. And your commitment on transition defense, when you are using guys that like to operate inside the arc on the other end, and they are not able to get back, is going to be massive, because I think the transition offense is going to be doing numbers this year. From a points per possession basis, I think it will probably break the record just due to this new rule. And if that is the case, I think you have to kind of look at how you use these players. Even we're talking about the guys that finished first and second place in MVP last year.
Yeah.
Like this rule is really going to hurt 2 of the best players in the NBA, because
but Giannis is like unfazed. Like he's the perfect guy for that. Like
sure.
Giannis.
Well, Giannis is. I don't really consider Giannis a big. Like I think he's like a wing big hybrid. Like he's Giannis is his own thing. He's a unicorn. Like he's one of the best transition defenders in the NBA. Yeah. Also operates outside. And creating from the perimeter way more than Joel Embiid, a little bit more than Nikola Jokic, although Jokic is a little bit more capable of creating from the perimeter than Embiid. But I just think that it's going to be an issue, because if you watch these games, once again, whether they're complaining about fouls or it's just like a fatigue thing where they can't get back, like that's the big thing that I think goes back to Doc, is like you need to get through to these players that they need to get back, because in the Celtics games and in the Spurs game, the cameramen from NBC Sports Philly couldn't even, they would cut to Joel Embiid, or they would cut to the coach on the sideline or whatever, and immediately there would be an open 3 on the other end, just outlet pass, open 3, outlet pass, open 3. And that's going to happen when you're not getting back on transition defense with this new rule, with guys that are a little bit more lumbering and take a little bit to get back. And due to the fact that that is now out the window, it's just going to be really messy, and something that those teams, especially the Sixers, have to kind of adjust to this season.
We'll end on this. does it get figured out? Are the Sixers going to be okay? And like it's January 1st and the Sixers are a top 3 seed in the East. What do you think that's ultimately where this goes?
It's really hard for me to figure out because before the season, I said on paper, this is the best team of the Joel Embiid era.
Mm-hmm.
This is the best team. Now, they might not have that second guy with Jimmy Butler if James Harden doesn't get back to the level that he was. And so far, it looks like he might.
Mm.
But the depth of this team is really the strength of this team. That everyone loves the 18-19 Sixers. And I'm like, that team is not good. Like they had 4 good top players. Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris in the playoffs were actually not very good at all. It was really just the top 2 that kind of held things together. But like we were playing Mike Scott big minutes, who like has never been in a playoff rotation. James Ennis, who was a journeyman. We had no backup center, which famously was the downfall of that team in the Toronto Raptors series. Like who was our 5th starter? I can't even JJ Redick. Okay, yeah, JJ's good, but like the nostalgia for that team has always been a little bit weird to me because I felt like if they had kept that team and they had built on it into the next season, they would have been fantastic. But this team, I was like, my expectations haven't been this high for the Sixers going into a season since the 1920 season, the COVID season, that was a disaster for the Sixers, not just because of COVID, but because the Al Horford thing didn't work. Tobias Harris had a down year. Ben Simmons was probably his last really good year in the NBA, to be honest. And it was mostly when Embiid was out and we weren't winning a ton of games. So like we only won like 44 games. We were the 6th seed that year. Like it was a weird season. And that was my fear for this year, was that the expectations were going to be that high where they're championship contenders again. And then it's going to come down to these weird fit issues and all of this stuff and blah, blah, blah. And my thing is, if Joel Embiid is healthy, and he can figure out how to get back to that MVP form, I think the Sixers are going to still win like 50 to 55 games. And I think they'll be a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. If Joel Embiid's foot is really a problem, I know this is a little bit of a cop-out answer, but like that's kind of all that matters to me because Harden is back. I think Maxey will figure it out. Tobias has been thriving in his new role. The 5th starter, PJ Tucker's honestly not a very good fit with the starters. It's not a clean for like Danny Green was a much better fit with that lineup. And even Matisse Thybulle was for stretches of last year, even though Thybulle can drive me crazy. And he's not even in the rotation right now. But I would just say I would lean more towards they figure it out and they win 50 to 55 games. They're a top 3 or 4 seed in the Eastern Conference than this being a disaster. But there are signs right now, especially on the defensive end, that this thing could go off the rails quick and they might need to make some massive changes.
We shall see. TBD, you got merch, you got your own show, you're all in on your podcast and everything else this year. Very excited and very happy for you, sir. You got a Patreon, you're all in. What would you like to plug as we wrap up here, man?
So follow You Know Ball on YouTube. You can tag me in this if you would like.
Yeah. They have tags now on YouTube.
Yes, you can tag me in the title even. You Know Ball with TrillBroDude. Yeah. I started doing that when people come on the pod. But yeah, so we're trying to build up our following on YouTube. You can also subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. If you become a fan of the podcast from there, subscribe for the Patreon. Check it out. We also got we have like some really big announcements coming up about some other things, but I will just leave it at that.
Brian Colangelo joining TBD.
Yes, full-time co-host. Yeah.
There you go. TBD, nothing but the best for you, my friend. And we'll have to reconnect again soon.
Thanks, bud.